Okay, so the opening like that is how most people are traditionally taught to see the diminished scale when it comes to film score kind of sound. So we're not covering that first. We're covering, can you get a comical and playful sound out of the diminished scale? And if you watch the previous video, I have this tendency to look at things in the pan-diatonic kind of fashion. So everything we're going to do in here is constructed out of the diminished scale. And it produces a very kind of almost Lydian sort of playfulness, okay? So we're using the one built on half whole. And so what we're going to do is take that enharmonic shape that produces the C major triad, and you get that Lydian note. And if you use notes from the diminished scale, you get this kind of flat 3 kind of Lydianish sound. And you can throw an occasional diminished chord in there. We're not revolving around the diminished chord. The diminished chord is revolving around this enharmonic C major chord that can be formed within the scale. So you can alternate between a diminished chord, and this is a very common thing to do, like a major chord alternating between a diminished chord. Tchaikovsky's Sixth Symphony, okay? Most people probably haven't heard it but these days anymore, but a lot of people probably have. So let's listen to the piece first. So I just gave you my draft that I started this with. Every single part in here is done with the diminished scale, but I'm using it in that pan-diatonic kind of thinking, not just forming it over a diminished chord. So what happens if we use this enharmonic C kind of chord with the sharp 11, it sounds very Lydian-like. And here's the opening. So that sounds very like we're going to go into some kind of Lydian piece. But when the melody comes in, we're using notes of the diminished scale, okay? So we have that C kind of Lydian sound. So when we play the melody, there's that E flat, okay? And that alternating between a diminished chord and that sort of C Lydian or just C sharp 11 sound. But we have the interplay between a minor a flat 3 and a regular 3. And if I play this in regular Lydian, it actually doesn't sound right now. So that flat 3 produced from the diminished scale sounds so much better, in my honest opinion. It gives it a really comical edge. So that when the melody reoccurs, alternation, diminished chord, and then almost like an E flat minor to the C major. Those can still be enharmonically formed in the scale. Okay? And then just basically a C major triad that enharmonically can be spelled in it. So this is what I mean by pan-diatonic kind of thinking. On the transition, we go from an F sharp kind of shape, major, to A, to C, to back to A, to F, to back to A. Okay, walking through the diminished scale. Enharmonic triads that can form in the diminished scale. And then all the passing tones are just using the diminished scale in between those chords, the melody. So then it's kind of answered again by more parallel triad kind of shapes walking through the diminished scale. So I did spell them as their triad shapes and not the enharmonic versions, but they're still the same. They're still from the diminished scale. Chords that could be formed from all the notes of the diminished scale. If I just take the melody part of that second aspect, it uses every note from the diminished scale. Okay, so just take interesting note that you don't have to use these scales as this diminished scale has to be played over a diminished chord, or if you're into jazz, you could use it over like a dominant flat 9. But the point is that don't look at this just as an action tense scale. I mean, you get that Lydian-ish kind of sound, but since you're using the diminished scale as your source material, it starts sounding like a disjunct Lydian, and that's the whole point. You can get a very comical, playful sound out of this scale by using the n-harmonic triads that you can form with literally just the source material of the diminished scale. But I'm spelling things different to be in that third stack shape. If I used purely the diminished scale spellings, it wouldn't look like that. It's just easier to read that way. That's why I did it. But you don't have to use a diminished chord over the diminished scale. You don't have to. That's a big rumor. You can use this completely and totally for your source material to get a very comical, fun kind of sound. And that's why I'm not starting with action kind of music, because that's where everybody usually jumps to when they think the diminished scale in film music. So like the augmented scale, we found we can still get a playful sound out of it, as well as a action-y kind of tense sound. This same occurs with the diminished scale. It doesn't have to be used in that traditional way where you're thinking you're just going to use a diminished chord over it, or maybe form like minor second clusters or whatnot. And it's still can be used to get that kind of Lydian, almost Lydian sound, but it's slightly not Lydian. So it's a very interesting scale that way. Especially if you start to look at things like that. What is this n-harmonically equivalent to? So we're going to just listen to it again as I leave. So enjoy. Hopefully you learned something new by looking at a scale from a different angle. So let's listen to it again with all this in mind. And remember, every aspect of this was written purely with the diminished scale notes, just for demonstration that the diminished scale does not have to sound tense.